As I said at the end of the last video, I believe that drawing is just something that humans do. We like to make marks, and if you give a small kid a crayon, you'll get something like this. This is a student brought me a picture of what their kids do. So a very young child. We just like to make marks, and if you give a kid a crayon and they'll scribble on it. It just seems to be pleasurable to them. As a kid gets older and they start to learn language, what we see is that they start to then try and draw things that convey information. They move more towards cartoons. I think I'm going to tell you what I think is going on here later, but I think here they're doing a more honest assessment of what they're seeing. They're actually trying to draw what they see. As they start to learn language, you'll see that the drawings become closer to language. And, you give a kid a crayon and they go, ah, and they draw this crazy thing. And what is that, honey? Well, it's a bird. And then someone will come across and go, no, that's not a bird. And they'll do like the little McDonald's M, and here you go, that's a bird. And what they're doing is they're teaching them a symbol. They're teaching them a piece of language. They're teaching them an icon. So you see like here, it looks like an icon of a door. And then we start to learn stick figures and smiley faces and emojis. And we're no longer drawing things that relate to what they look like in our vision. They're much more related to language. And you'll get images like this. You'll get these cartoon drawings, and it's just like, it's a visual list of what's in front of them. Like if I asked you to write a list of what are you seeing, you say, oh, I see a flower, I see 3 kids, I see a cat, I see a baby stroller, I see some grass, I see a house. But when it goes into drawing and you get those lists, nothing's the right size. Everything's like the same size. The placement's all weird. Nothing is in front of anything else. So it's just cartoon drawing. Now, this is what I think is going on for most of us when we're walking around day to day. I'm going to talk about 3 different types of visual perception in this part of the lecture. I think this iconic or use value perception is how most of us operate. If you pay attention to what you do when you walk around day to day, this is what you're doing. You're interacting with the world like it's a bunch of icons on a computer, and you're basically, trying to use them. That's why I call it use value perception. So there's a good evolutionary reason for this. This is an easier way to interact with the world. We just have a mental idea of like car, and then we just use car. If you're in the jungle and you're trying to reassess every time you see a tiger as a new experience, you're probably going to get eaten. But if you have a mental image of there's tiger, oh crap, I better get out of the way, you're more likely to survive. So this stems from this evolutionary need to respond really quickly. We basically want to know, can I eat it? Is it trying to eat me? Can I sleep with it? Is it trying to sleep with me? Can I sleep under it? Those basic survival functions. And as we built society, we just map that ability onto everything else. So what you'll get with these iconic use value perceptions is, like I said, say you're thinking about a door. We'll go back to this drawing here of the door that the kid, you see what they're doing is they're just drawing, how do you use a door? What do you want out of a door? So a door is a rectangle. It's a hole in the wall that I want to get through that's in the shape of a rectangle. And there's a circle that I got to grab to get through the door. What's a bed? It's like a rectangle that I lay on top of. What's a person? It's arms, feet, body. And what do I care about most is the emoji of the face and are they happy? So I'll call this, oftentimes throughout the semester, I'll call this your cartoon brain. You're generating these cartoony icons that have to do with how do you use things. What we want to start to do is look at the world like it's broken. So if you're walking up to a door and you're just using it, you're going to be interacting it with that icon in your head. It's a rectangle, grab the circle, get through it. What you're not going to do is you're not going to stop and you're not going to look at all the dirt on it and all the screws that hold it together and the spring mechanism. You're just going to ignore that information and get through the door as quick as possible. If the door's broken, all of a sudden you're going to stop and you're going to look at all the details because you're having a problem solve. So a lot of the strategies I'm going to give you in class are flat screen strategies, which is what I'm showing here. And that's going to be a more analytical, like you're slowing down and assessing the world in more detail. So what I'm showing you here is the idea of flat screen perception. This word homunculus is a funny word that means tiny little man. This flat screen idea of visual perception was put forward by the philosopher Descartes, and so we call it the Cartesian theater. His idea was that visual perception is pretty much just like your eyes are these movie cameras in reverse. They suck in a visual from outside, and then they project it onto a screen in your head, and there's a homunculus, a tiny little person chilling out in a Barca lounge or just watching a movie in your head. Now, this is not how perception works. We know this for a fact. I'll talk about a couple reasons why it's a silly idea, but it is very useful. All of our drawings exist in a picture plane. A picture plane is just the rectangle of the paper that we're drawing on, and if we can, and that's a flat screen, right? It's a flat piece of paper. So if we can think about the visual reality in front of us as just shapes and colors on a flat screen, like a color by number, all we have to do to make a pretty successful image is just take the shapes off this screen and put them onto the flat screen of our paper. So this flat screen way of looking, this color by number way of looking, is very, very helpful to get started in drawing. It can get you, about 85% of the way towards realism. So you're looking here at a piece by Andy Warhol, and it's just a literal color by number. Now, as the shapes get smaller and there's more variety in the colors, or in our cases, the amount of gray that gets put into the shapes, you'll start to get a more photorealistic image. So here it's still not very realistic, but it's more realistic than this. And if we move to like this Richard Estes painting, Central Savings, now you have a very complicated photorealist picture. All of you, once you understand this idea of flat screen perception, should be able to do something like this by the end of the semester. Now, I imagine most of you are sitting there thinking, oh, get the hell out of here, like you're out of your mind. There's no way I could do a painting like that. But if you really stop and think about why would you be scared to do something like this, you'll see that what's happening is you're just overwhelmed by how many shapes there are, and their relationships between them. But any particular shape on here, it's just a bunch of rectangles, a couple circles, some letters, a few triangle shapes. So any individual element of this thing is a very simple shape. It's just the way that the shapes relate to each other that gets complicated and overwhelming, and it just takes some time. So you would all have the ability to do this hopefully by the end of the semester. You just need to be willing to spend like 6 months on it, which I'm sure most of you wouldn't be. But we're going to develop flat screen ways of looking that will help you learn how to get all of these different shapes in the right place relative to each other, and then fill them in with the right amount of gray. We're not going to worry about color, but the right amount of gray. Similar like this with Gus Hines. Now the shapes here are more complicated. They're not rectangles. But really, if you can get the big shapes in place, we're looking at, reflections on a bumper on a car. If you can get the big shapes in place, then all of these swirly little blobby shapes in here, as long as you get close, people will believe you. There's no one that has like the right type of brain to calculate the exact shape that this tree should be given the angle it's at relative to the piece of metal here if the sun's over there. That's just crazy. And most people haven't spent enough time staring at reflections of trees in car bumpers to know if you got it wrong or not. So as long as you get close with the shapes, then you'll be able to convince most people that you did an awesome job. The other thing that makes this a little bit more complicated is that the colors have gradients, and that just means it changes slowly from like the light blue to the white, or from these greens into the browns. So that's stuff that we'll deal with as well. But really, I would say this type of image is really easy to impress people with, and not as hard to make as you would think. An image like this by Gerhard Richter, which again is a great photorealist painting, this is more difficult because it's all pretty much gradients. Things aren't really blocked off into shapes, and it's of a human figure. And if you get something wrong on a human, like if you paint the weirdest nose ever, we know what people look like more than we know what car bumpers look like. So this is definitely more difficult. and there's just all these fuzzy things and these details that aren't as easily broken into shapes. But underneath here, there's still like an egg shape in the head. There's a triangular shape here on the neck and shoulder, and that breaks into a smaller triangle. And then there's like this shape here. There's a triangle on the breast. There's a triangle of the dark right here. There's basically another triangle here. The nose is a triangle. So even an image like this, if we break it into shapes and we take a kind of flat screen approach to it, it will at least help us get started. Now, this idea of the Cartesian theater just philosophically doesn't make sense, nor is it how our brain works or how our eyes work. But philosophically, it's silly, because if all of this person's perception is explained away by having someone sit in his head looking at the screen, then I have to explain how this guy perceives the screen, and then I would need a small person in his head looking at his screen, and then I have to explain this guy's visual perception, and so on, and you get what's called an infinite regress. Anytime you're out, and this is just had nothing to do with art, but for you as citizens of the world, anytime you run into an explanation that actually just like delays answering the question one step, I'd be skeptical of it. So things like, well, how did the universe get made? Well, God made it. Well, okay, who made God? Or how did life get on Earth? Well, aliens brought it here. Okay, well, how did the aliens have life? Or reality is a computer simulation. Okay, well, who made the simulation? And then who made their reality? It may all be the case. It may be the case that we're living in a computer, but it doesn't answer the real question that we want to know the answer to, which is like, how does reality exist? At some point, it just has to exist without being a simulation. So same thing here with this idea of the flat screen. It's helpful for us as artists, but it's not the right way to think about seeing. The other problem is we now know that this just isn't how our eyes or our brains work. Our eyes are not cameras. First off, we've got two of them, so we see in 3 dimensions. Second off, they don't just like click, click, take a picture, and then be done with it. We don't see like that. I'll talk about eyes much later in the semester, but there's a very small part of our eye that's in color and in high resolution. The rest is in black and white and low resolution. And what happens is we have what are called circadic movements of the eye. Those are real small, twitchy, fast, multiple times a second movements of the eye that point the high resolution color part of the eye at what our brain and our eyes determine it thinks is important. And the rest of the black and white stuff is just helping guide that high resolution part to where it needs to be. And then our brain takes all that information from the high resolution part and stitches it together into what seems like a persistent image. So the first person who really started studying this was the scientist Alfred Yarbus. This is an example of his circadic eye tracking studies. The saccades are just the motion of the eyes. Those quick little twitchy motion of the eyes are called saccades. And so he would track the circadic motion of the eye. So he would give people, for example, like this face of a woman here, and then he would track where their eye bounced around. What you see happens when you give someone an image like this is the first thing they do is they edge detect. And so we're going to be dealing with this idea of edge detection a lot throughout the semester. And I'll caution you away from it a lot of times as well. But the first thing you do is edge detect. From an evolutionary standpoint, it's really important to be able to tell where objects start and stop, because like you don't want to walk into trees, you want to walk around them, and you want to be able to tell like the predator and the leaves from the background. So you edge detect really quickly. Once you've edge detected, you really don't go back out there. Once your brain has established a perimeter, it just keeps assuming the perimeter. And then looking at the face, you'll see what happens is it basically just looks at the emoji, the eyes, nose, and mouth, and especially the eyes. We're tracking the eyes a lot because we care. That's where we're getting the information about how someone thinks about us. Notice also that the fovea, that high resolution part of the eye, never ever looked at the forehead, the cheeks, or the chin unless it was just moving across it to get somewhere else. So any of these areas that we tend to think of as blank, there's no detail there, there's no information, we just tend to totally ignore that. So unless you're like madly in love and you're staring at every pore in your lover's face and think, oh my God, the landscape of your skin is so beautiful, your brain is like running a forehead algorithm and just plunking in an assumption about what's going on there. So if you're worried about your zits and all that kind of stuff, people probably aren't even looking at them. They're just filling in like, I don't know, forehead right there, and they're really worried about what's going on with your eyes. Our brains do that. They just pick up little bits of information and make up the rest of it based on what we think we know, what we've seen in the past, and then just evolution, what had taught our species. You can see this in the way advertisers do packaging, and you can see that they do studies of this kind of stuff because they're able to tap into our subconscious behaviors pretty quickly. So this was a study where they had people look at meat, and they'd see what they look at first, second, and third, and then the red is just how long they stayed. So it's a heat map. So you can see the first thing that happens is you basically are looking, is it a good piece of meat? Does it have gross maggots in it or something like that? Is there too much fat? Then you go, once you've determined that it is a piece of meat you want, you spend a lot of time reading the information, looking at the price, probably looking at the fat percentage, whatever we're kind of biased against. And then on the way out, you'll really quickly look at the brand or whatever, what type of meat it is. So they purposely set things up in grocery stores to match what they think that you want in the experience, and you're gonna, like, we read left to right, so they're gonna assume that you're gonna want to come in left to right. Here you're looking at a study of one set of these images was given to men, one set of the images was given to women. I don't know if they accounted for sexual preference, whether people were gay or not, but they had them look at the pictures and then did a heat map of who stayed longer where. You can take a guess here. Normally I like to have the class chatter about this, but that would be hard in this situation. So I'll point some things out to you just because it's interesting and funny. This is what women looked at here. You'll see that women are really checking out the abs. They're totally staying away from men's crotches. They're checking out each other's crotches for some reason. Everyone's kind of checking out breasts. Men are checking out the competition. It looks like everyone's interested in faces. Everyone seems to be interested in abs. Men, you'll see them, they'll just kind of trail down the whole body and they'll stop before they get caught, but they're not worried about getting caught here for whatever reason. So you get to see all these subconscious behavior patterns. You also get to see some like culturally biased things. I'm not sure why women are looking here, but I'm assuming they're looking at either the thigh gap or how well the person's groomed. So there's some kind of judgment. Women are looking at shoulders and biceps a lot. And then another really, I think, interesting instance of how what our culture combines with our just natural ways that we behave is if you look at the image of what women look at, there's a fair amount of heat on the left hand, which would be looking for a ring, I assume, looking for a wedding ring. And if you look at how guys behave, there's like zero attention at all to the left hand, zero attention at all paid to if there's a wedding ring. So that may be a combination of like cultural knowledge about wedding rings, obviously, and then maybe cultural biases about how men and women are expected to behave, or maybe just natural subconscious behavior of men being kind of dogs. It's hard to tell on those things, but you can learn a lot about human behavior just from how the eye moves, because it gives you a picture into what the brain wants and how the brain's putting together information. This is why learning how to see and learning about seeing is so important. It's like half of our behavior on a daily basis. Here's a better idea of what's going on with these saccadic motions. So this is by the artist Nick Sisanis from his comic book on flattening. He's showing here someone looking at the Mona Lisa. Each one of these is like where they stopped at when they're looking at the image. So you get the pattern of the saccadic motion, and then this would show what piece of detail they're going to. So you see that they keep coming back to the eyes, coming back to the eyes, coming back to the eyes, then establishing the perimeter, and then coming back to the eyes. And right here, he goes ahead and combines all the panels. And what's happening is each one of these are like a millisecond of perception, and that's the fovea, the high resolution part of the eye, sees that. And then like the brain, without you being aware of it, stitches it all together and makes the illusion of a persistent image. So what we're aiming towards in a lot of these early assignments is trying to get you back in touch with your inner child and reconnecting the motion of your hand to the motion of your eyes. I think that's what's going on in these early childhood drawings, is they don't have a language brain yet. So when they're looking at stuff, all they can do is make a record with their hand of the direction that their eyes are moving in. And you always see this in kids' drawings, that they never go back and fix anything. It's just one solid continuous line going around the object. And these are actually wind up being really good drawings. And then someone comes in, like I said, and starts, trying to teach them, oh no, honey, this is how you draw a bird. And we wind up with way worse images because of it. So we need to reconnect you to your inner childhood. We need to reconnect you to your saccadic eye motions and start developing your hand-eye coordination. One last thing I wanted to get in is this idea that I hinted at earlier of realism versus photorealism. It's very hard to show this on a screen because the screen automatically turns these back into photorealist images, but I've seen this painting in person. I actually own a painting by this guy, so I can attest to the fact that he is very good at the difference between photorealism and realism. When something is realistic, it feels like you can touch it. It feels like I could reach out and grab it. When something's photorealistic, I don't get that sense. So when you see this painting in person, it looks like a photograph of a baseball on a desk. There is absolutely no sense that I could reach in past the glass and grab the baseball. It just looks like a photograph. But the glass and the tape is painted in such a way that I feel like I could pick the tape off. It felt like I could pick at the glass and accidentally cut myself. So he moved between photorealism, which like I said has about 85% of the information, and then realism, which is 100% of the information you need to fool someone into thinking that something's present. Remember, this is flat screen stuff. When we're dealing with saccadic eye motion stuff, there's more information that gets picked up than what you could ever encode in a photograph. That again is why I'm pushing towards realism in this class. I know in the online environment we're going to be working from a lot of photographs, so every now and then I'll have you draw from objects around your house. But we can recover a sense of realism from photographs as well, and I'll be teaching you strategies for that. And this is another Anthony Wachula's painting. It's another great example of everything in here is photorealistic. When you see this in person, there's no sense you could actually reach in and grab the tomato, but it does look like a photograph. And then all of this stuff, all of these sticky notes and the chalkboard and the actual object of the photograph itself, all the tape, that looks like actual stuff that you could go up, and it's really tempting to go up and try and pick it off. And then he does this fun thing that's even more convincing in person, where it looks like the knife moves from being photorealistic into being realistic. That's partially because of the shadow that he has cast here, and partially because of some of how he handled the paint. So that's a topic that we're going to be talking about more and more over the semester. But the first thing, like I said, is I want to get us back in touch with the saccadic motions and back in touch with the inner child. So that's what a lot of these beginning assignments are geared towards. I know they seem weird as you go through them, but there is a purpose for it. So just take each one seriously, but also have fun with it and know that we're going to build up to other strategies later on.